Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to our sponsors, as well as our committee members, our panelists, and participants. I have had the great fortune over the last 6 months of chairing the Workforce Adaptability Steering Committee. As many of you know, the origin of the steering committee and this workshop really emanated from a study spearheaded by Nick D'Onofrio, Making Value for America and Embracing the Future of Manufacturing Technology and Work. At the foundation of that study was a recognition of the impact of globalization, disruptive technologies, and new business models on how things are produced, where value is created, and consequently, disruption in jobs, the activities of jobs, as well as the know-how required for those jobs. So as we consider a journey, as an example, we are in a digital universe which many are projecting growing exponentially, all accepting it more than 2x every 2 years. The net result of that, by 2020, projection is 44 zettabytes of data, which is 44 billion terabytes of data. Now, where is that data coming from? 2017, this year, is a tipping point in terms of the data is now flowing from the emerging economies. Why is that? As we integrate more and more of our mobile devices and components, we are now beginning to see the promise of the Internet of Things or everything. But even that is at the early phases. In 2013, about 2% of that data was coming from the Internet of Things embedded objects. By 2017, we're at about 4%. By 2020, that's about 10%. But we, again, are already seeing the impact of that, of the industrial Internet of people and things, with vision glass systems and its incorporation, whether it's in the AGCO or in surgical units or in Boeing or in General Electric, in terms of equipping the employee to be able to more rapidly identify and extract information, to scan information, to address quality control. And so we're at the beginning of this, quite frankly, where we see the emergence of the intelligent machine. That alone is not enough. It has to be integrated with applied analytics that are responsive in real time for many applications. But most importantly, we can do all of that, but if we're not enabling people to be able to connect, integrate, and create further value, it will not deliver on its promise. So we need to prepare the people for the future. There are a lot of business opportunities, obviously, that are emerging, both in terms of the business model, but also in the ability to do real-time mission control on critical systems, on the ability to diversify revenue streams, and the ability to provide global visibility on supply chains and optimization, as well as efficient and intelligent operations. So there's much value to be gained. What is it doing? It's fundamentally changing the marketplace. I'm coming from a materials and chemicals background. Today, the designs are happening at the in silico level. We're moving from bytes to atoms. We're designing facilities. It's fundamentally changing every aspect of the mode of operation of these businesses. And the bottom line is the future belongs to those companies and those people that learn how to take data and convert it to knowledge and information that they can act on. Now, I often refer back to the Darwin quote. It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And that really brings us to today's workshop. Today's workshop, the committee really set 4 objectives. The first objective is to educate, to raise the awareness of the critical foundational importance of adaptive behaviors and setting that as a skill foundation going forward. Part 2 of that is to bring the power of we. There is an incredible wealth of knowledge in this room coming from many different vertical sectors and education and policy, but to share best practices. Together we can learn from each other. The third is we also can learn and identify where are their unmet needs and gaps, and to be able to articulate not only those gaps, but our ideas on how we can potentially close those gaps. And so I passionately encourage you to actively engage throughout our entire day. And that brings us to the fourth, is the outcome. We will be publishing a workshop proceedings, and the intent and target audience are for business leaders, for educators and policymakers, as they consider what should we be doing moving forward? How do we expedite those best practices? So we've organized the workshop really with that in mind. The workshop will begin with a case for change. We're going to hear from Nick in terms of the context, setting the backdrop. We're going to hear industry perspective. We're going to hear educational perspective. Case for change. Why does adaptability matter and why now? Then we're going to talk about what does adaptability look like. It's one of those words that we all use, but seriously, in the context of individuals, interpersonal, teams, organizations, what does it look like? Then we're going to have lunch, and then you got to prepare to get engaged, because in the afternoon we're going to have a series of lightning rod, and we'll explain more as we get there. But we're going to first begin with analytics and measurement. So how do you know where you're at, and how do you measure your progress? So that's what that panelists will address. Then we'll go to a conversation from companies as well as higher education, and then we'll segue into K through 12 and out of school learning. And we'll close the day with a summary from each of the panelists on what we heard in terms of key opportunities and next steps. So I wanted to give you a flavor of what's ahead. Prior to that, however, I want to welcome Al Romig, who's the Executive Officer of the National Academy of Engineers. One, we thank you, Al, and the Academy for supporting these activities, very paramount for the future of our country. Dr. Romig is the Chief Operating Officer, which means he's responsible for finance, program, and membership operations of the Academy. Prior to the Academy, he served as the Vice President and General Manager of Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company and their Advanced Development Program. So with that, I'll have Al make some comments.
Well, good morning, everyone. Put on these glasses so I can see the notes I made for myself here. Well, welcome to the National Academies. One of the things that I might suggest, if you've never been in this building before, this is the original building of the National Academies. And when you wander out towards lunch, if you bear to your left, you get out to what's called the Great Hall. It's actually really quite fabulous space. I'd ask you to take a few minutes and enjoy it. I think you would find it really quite a fascinating place to look at. If you're a bit of a history buff, I will tell you that this building was funded by a gift from Andrew Carnegie in 1920, back when philanthropists supported learned institutions, I think would probably be the best way to describe it. I don't want to take a lot of time here. There's too much meat in the actual conference, but I did want to start by thanking all the sponsors who made this possible. General Electric, the Advanced Manufacturing Office at the DOE, Nick, Allied Minds, EY, which I'm an old guy, I still think of it as Ernst & Young, Dassault Systems, and also a whole variety of the original sponsors that sponsored the original study that was done on this board, which I think you're going to, there it is. And I think you're going to put this outside, right, Ken, so people will be able to see it. And there's something actually quite significant about how this is being funded in the sense that the Academies does about 250 activities a year. That could be everything from a follow-up consensus study to workshops, roundtables, et cetera. It's about $300 million worth of activity a year. It's really quite a substantial amount of work. Its roots go back to the Civil War, when in the spring of 1863, Abraham Lincoln said, I can't get a straight answer on anything involving technology, so I'm going to create this independent academy, and we're not going to pay them. So, in fact, none of you are getting paid to do any of this. The whole idea is if you're not on the payroll, you'll give them an honest shake in terms of your answer. In the beginning, it was scientists, engineers, and physicians. Eventually, it got very concentrated into academic science, and so then the academy morphed inside, and there are now 3 academies that exist underneath that original congressional charter. So you wonder how a three-headed monster can sort of run as one entity, but we actually are able to do that. The National Academy of Engineering itself dates back to 1964, as I said, these events really are meant to inform the government. If I look at our activities now, of those 250 or so a year, $300 million, about 85% of it comes from the federal government, and the other 15% is from a variety of philanthropic sources, for example, foundations and so forth, because really the role is to support not only the government, but to support society in general. And I think one of the trends you'll see happening now is two things: more interactions between the academies, an area that's oftentimes called convergence, where physical sciences, engineering, computation, medicine, all sort of converge into an open white space. And you'll see more and more things that are happening, internationally, collaborations with other academies. And so with that, let me just say welcome again. This is all about advancing the discussion, which is really what happens at the Academy. And I hope you enjoy your time here. As Teresa said, there will be a proceedings that's produced of this. That's going to be more than just a set of minutes. It'll capture some real actions, et cetera, that come out of here. And who knows, this might eventually lead to another consensus study at some point in the future, depending what kind of meat we generate during the discussion here today. So welcome again. Enjoy your time. I'll be with you a fair amount of the day. And please enjoy your time here. Thank you.
The first panel would like to come up to the table.
Good morning. Welcome. Teresa did a great job setting the stage for the workshop today. We have a lot of transformation underway, and adaptability is critically important. This is the first panel. I think you'll enjoy this set of 4 panelists who are here to set the stage and really describe from their viewpoint why adaptability matters. So the organization of this panel, each of them will have 10 minutes to share their comments. And after, we're going to hold the questions until after all 10, each of them have their 10-minute comments. And you will have cue cards. So the panelists, you'll know that when you're up for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, make sure you watch your time there. It's very important. But also, we're going to be handing out comment cards so that if you have questions, feel free to write them down. We'll be collecting them, and we'll also try and save some time at the end so that we can have questions from the floor. I will introduce each speaker before they come up. So just briefly, there's bios that are available. But the first one, I think all of you know, Nick D'Onofrio. He was actually the chair of the precursor work, Making Value for America. And he has a 44-year track record with IBM. He's a veteran there. He was the EVP of Innovation and Technology. He shares a lot of passion, is a great one to start setting the stage for this. So with that, Nick.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you all. I have to agree with you. I thought Teresa did a brilliant job of kicking this off, Teresa, and now you just showed everyone how smart I am picking you to lead this activity. You made me very proud, and she worked very hard with us on the Making a Value for America study as well. By the way, that study came out of a workshop. So I want you to take what Al said very seriously. Depending upon what we conclude today, we could motivate people, which means we have to go out and collect money, by the way. Have you gotten the picture? Most of these studies have to be self-funded. And we got the horsepower, we've got the capability, we have the people. We just need the resources, the money, to be able to do that. So I'm thrilled that we've gotten this far for this morning, because as we finished that Making Value for America report, one of the things that bothered me the most about it was that while it might have been one of the best downloaded reports ever put up on the National Academy website, I think that was true for a while, Al. I mean, it was in the top 10. I didn't feel that we did anything. I didn't feel that we did enough to move this country forward. Because the real fundamental issue here has little to do with engineering. I mean, I'm an engineer. I love this place. This is hallowed ground for me. But the fact of the matter is, it's the technical workforce that I worry the most about. It's the group in the middle. We call them mid-skilled America. And as they lose their way, we lose our country. It's no more complicated than that. So as we think this morning about this topic, and as we talk through this topic, I want you to be thinking about perhaps half of the country that never goes to college. And what do we do for them, about them, with them? How do we make them adaptable? How do we help them get the skills that they need so that we can build the economy that we need in this country? Because you can't build it without them. You just can't. This whole idea of work is something I want you to be torturing yourself with. What's happened to workflow? Where is workflow? Why is there no work in the middle? Why is it all concentrated either in the cheapest sector or the highest educated sector? That's not a very good economy. That doesn't make a lot of sense. This idea of making value for America started out as a simple manufacturing study. And as anybody who was involved in it knows, I refused to participate in it because what we didn't need was another manufacturing strategy. We needed a value creation strategy for this country. And unless we come up with those surprise moments that you heard about last night from Franz Johansson, the surprise moments, we'll walk away from here feeling good about each other, but we won't actually have done any good. I'm an engineer. Work equals force times distance. You can push all you want. You can absolutely sweat blood. But if there's no distance, technically there's no work. So I want you to be realistic today. I want you to absolutely believe in yourself that if we don't do it, there's nobody else who's going to do it. You're the best, some of the best people in the world to be able to address this issue. I also fully realize and appreciate that we are all of like mind, which is why we're here. So I don't want to be condescending. I don't want to be preaching to the choir. That's really not the audience. That's why these surprise moments are going to be so critical today. We have to be doing things that we haven't done before. I'm a second-generation American. My grandparents were all born in southern Italy. My father never got out of the 10th grade. Victim or family grown up in the Depression, had to go to work, lost his mother at child, his youngest brother, he's one of four. Typically sad story. Father was a shoemaker, no work, had to go press clothes for a living. But there's one thing he just absolutely burned into my head, and it's about as simple as it gets. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So if all you're going to do is what you've been doing, then all you're going to get is what you've been getting. And we can't allow that to happen in this space because we know what we're getting. And you know very well, just as Teresa points out, we're going to zettabytes. Actually, we're going to go to yottabytes, by the way. That's like 10 to the 24th. And yoctoseconds, 10 to the minus 24th in your lifetime. Just as that happens, I'm telling you right now, unless we do something, the middle gets poorer and poorer and sparser and sparser. And the problem for us becomes bigger and bigger. Because the burden falls on you and me. So either we do something about it, either we understand how we educate these people, how we motivate these people, how we direct these people, how we suggest that these people alter their careers. Unless we do something about that and be able to flow work to them, they're your biggest problem. I don't know who said this, but I thought it was very prophetic. Power usually comes when you have people. But when there's no work, that power is used against you.
Excellent comments, Nick. Thank you so much. Well done. Our next speaker is Guy Berger. Guy is with LinkedIn, and his job day in and day out is to mine the data. So you're looking for trends in the workplace, trying to understand where work is going, and obviously LinkedIn has a lot of data to mine through. So that's what you do day in and day out. We're glad to have you here. LinkedIn actually did a report with PricewaterhouseCoopers and came out with some amazing statistics on how much productivity is on the table as a result of adaptability. So I'm sure that'll be some of the foundation for your comments today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Teresa. So one disclaimer, unlike Nick, I am an economist, not an engineer, so feel free to discount my comments appropriately.
We always need one or two.
Yeah, not too
We
many.
need one or two of you.
One, two, not any more than that. So to start with, about as Teresa mentioned, about 4 years ago, we did a report with PwC, and one of the conclusions from that is because of a worldwide shortfall in workforce adaptability. We are leaving about 130 billion, 150 billion, I think, in productivity gains on the table every year. The number may have changed since then, but I think it's probably in the same. I would imagine the estimate wouldn't change if it was done today. Of that, they estimated 32 billion of that accrues to the United States. So I think that's the starting point for what I'm going to be talking about today. Since then, we've done a fair amount of work, and we're still doing work thinking about adaptability and human capital and the skills the labor force needs and will need. But I think before we dive into that, I want to give some context about the environment we currently live in. So I don't know how many of you follow the productivity statistics that the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases every quarter, but in fact, we hear there's sort of this phrase that some wag came up with, that you repeat something enough and people start believing it's true. And in a lot of these fora where people discuss the workforce and the future of the workforce, you sometimes hear this claim that the workforce is changing faster than it ever has. It's changing really fast. The productivity statistics tell what seems to be the opposite story. Productivity growth in the United States right now is the lowest it's been in about 30-something years. This is not only that. If you look at manufacturing specifically, and I know this is not a conversation, today's conversation is not about manufacturing. Manufacturing labor productivity has been basically unchanged for 6 years, which means that the typical worker hour in manufacturing produces as much value as it did in 2011, which is shocking. And I think economists are still puzzling about what exactly is going on. I don't think they have a perfect answer for this. And let me also add, by the way, this is worldwide. You see it in a lot of Western countries. You see productivity growth slowing even in emerging countries. People don't understand what's going on exactly, but I think it's important to keep this in mind, because I would suspect for many workers in the U.S. economy, there may have been certain things that have changed. The nature of the social contract with the employer, maybe how much they can rely on their specific job surviving downturns, but not necessarily that what they do is changing that much. That, however, doesn't mean that things aren't going to change. I mean, if you think about when the first personal computer was released, was sold, and when the IT really began to drive productivity growth in the United States, that was a gap of about 20 years. Electricity took a long time to change the workplace. So this doesn't mean that these robots and AI that are supposedly but not really changing the workplace at some point in the future won't change things. And it could happen, it could be that 1 year we're talking about, well, we don't see these things having an effect, and then 2 years later they're having a huge effect. So I guess I would just urge you that we're sort of in this environment where we're preparing for the future, and people are saying, how do you prepare for the future? And some people are saying, well, I know exactly what human capital you're going to need for that future. If you actually, this is going to sound harsh, but as somebody who used to work in forecasting, if somebody's convinced you that they know what the skills are going to be needed in 10, 25, 50 years, I would also like to sell you some oceanfront property in Kansas, because I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. So what do you do when you have uncertainty? And this ties back to Franz's talk yesterday. You plan for a lot of futures. I think there are a lot of ways to potentially do that, but I tend to think in terms of two related dimensions: adaptability and durability. Durability is the idea that what the human capital you have right now could survive a lot of change into the future. Adaptability, I think, is more lateral, which is, if change hits and all of a sudden some small chunk of your human capital becomes obsolete, you can quickly take the majority of the remainder and shift it to somewhere else where you can have a living. I think that when you think about and one of the challenges is when you look at the global education system, a lot of the market forces are actually pushing people into acquiring more, not more adaptable human capital. We did a report a few months ago with the World Economic Forum. We looked at our data, and you're seeing less prevalence, and this is just about college degrees. So to be fair, I'm not looking at middle skill workers. But you see that you see less of these classic university degrees like chemistry, history, civil engineering that potentially have broad application. You're seeing more specialized degrees like marketing, and this may have very good reasons to occur, but it also is pushing people into a situation where, as the knowledge you acquire becomes more and more specialized, you're more vulnerable to change. So that's just the setting, and I think if I can figure out how to operate this, I want to show some numbers that we have. I said that productivity growth is overall in the economy pretty slow, but there are places where it's happening, where it is actually happening. Technological change. This is certain kinds of old school, and these are skills, by the way, as measured by member profiles on LinkedIn, which is, and we tend to think of skills as the most granular way to measure human capital, and we're doing a lot of work on skills, so that's the context. This is the prevalence of certain kinds of, in New York City, of certain kinds of what I would call old school journalism industry skills like magazines, page layout, publishing, and you're seeing these skills coming down. So in certain industries, there is actually some disruption going on. They are experiencing faster productivity growth than they have in the past. On the right is one very specific technical skill. I don't know how many people here do a software, but it's called React.js. It's a hot skill, or what at least a few months ago was a hot skill in the software industry. And what you're seeing is that it's rising very fast. Our sense is that these highly technical, specialized skills that potentially drive a lot of value in the short run are also not terribly durable. As in, a worker that's acquiring these will quickly have to acquire another one in another year or two. What is going to be the foundation for that if you're a worker in this kind of industry? Well, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time learning React.js. You're going to want to develop a capacity to learn to learn a variety of these skills and quickly hop from one to the other. And you're going to need education and training to dedicate a lot of time, particularly early on, to developing that foundation. And maybe not so much saying, okay, well, we're going to have to retrain you for a really long time in these skills. By the time of which you're done with the training, those skills will have gone obsolete. And you can kind of see that on the right, and this is business strategy, which is kind of a vague soft skill, though I don't really like the term soft skill because I think it's too pejorative. This is something that actually seems to be, and this is not a super long time series, but it goes back a few years, and it's just prevalence of business strategy as a skill on people's LinkedIn profiles. And it's pretty steady. And the reason I highlight this being, the fact that it's pretty steady, even though it's a soft skill and business strategy can mean a lot of things, is because this is exactly the kind of thing that you think about in lots until we're willing to cede, we live in the matrix and we're willing to cede the entire economy to machines and just sit back and drink lemonade and mint juleps. We are going to be in a situation where you still need these human skills. And they can be business strategy, they can be adaptability, they can be lots of things. But that's sort of where I would urge us to dedicate a lot of these efforts. And I think this is require probably input not just from economists, but also from educational psychologists, human development experts, which is how do you set up people to be adaptable? And you don't necessarily want to force people to be in a situation where they have to learn stuff all the time in a way that is challenging for the human mind to do, and more to set up that foundation that kind of switch is actually easy, and to some extent they're cushioned by it. So I think that more or less wraps up what I wanted to say, but the main thing is, I think since we don't know what the future is going to look like and we have a lot of uncertainty about it, let's prepare our workforce toward what last night's speaker called, a variety of futures, as many futures as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Appreciate your comments. Our next speaker is Greg Duncan, and Greg is currently the president of PPL Electric Utilities. He's held that role since 2012. He's actually spent a lot of his career managing large organizations, electric utilities, gas utilities, and actually went into telecom for a while. So, this is a utility base has been changing a lot, and Greg has had a passion for understanding culture and trying to figure out how to move that change. So we'll hear from him on, his view of adaptability and what he's done at PPL in order to actually implement that. And I might add that PPL has been actually rewarded several times through J.D. Powers and others for customer satisfaction. So, the proof is in the pudding here on the good work that Greg's been doing. So, Greg.
Thanks, Wanda. Maybe I can have the
Clicker.
clicker.
Sure.
Yep. So I think I was invited here because so you think, so there's going to be somebody from an electric utility talking about adaptability, innovation. So what's that all about? So I think the message is, hey, if it's really, really important for somebody even in the electric utility industry, then it's got to be important for everybody. But I really appreciate the invite to come talk to all of you. So why is it important? And we've already talked about this quite a bit, but we're in an era of exponential technology change. And from my perspective, it's not only changing the way business is done within a particular business or the industry, it's actually upending business models. So everybody knows about Uber, Airbnb, but even the electric utility industry, there is a threat, and with every threat there's an opportunity, but a threat of upending the current business model. So the way the utilities were set up is that you have big generators, and then they generate electricity, and it flows through a transmission system, distribution system, ends up with the customers. So that's been going very well for 100 years. But through technology change, that is changing. So the way we make money, obviously, is selling kilowatt hours, energy. We also make money through investing capital. But what's happening with the advent of energy efficiency, all the different energy efficient appliances, lights, et cetera, our load that used to be growing is not either growing as much or maybe even decline. We also, with the benefits of solar and the economies of solar, customers are now looking to generate their own electricity. So what has worked for 100 years is not going to work over the next 5 to 10 years. And those companies that adapt to it will do very, very well. Those that don't will not. So it's very, very important. So the leader's challenge in my mind is, so what are the, if you have an organization, responsible for an organization, what are the characteristics that you need to really get after in order to improve your probability of long-term success? And in my view, it's that you need the right culture. So there's a lot of definitions of culture. For me, it's really a set of norms that it's almost like the unwritten rule book. How do you conduct business in an organization? And my view is if you don't have a culture that is supportive of adaptability or innovation, that it's just not going to happen. You can bring in all the innovative people and creative people, but if you have a culture that actually kills those ambitions, nothing's going to happen. So I've been focusing quite a bit on the culture. And in our case, what I'm trying to establish is something called a constructive culture, which is a culture that is really reaching to achieve exceptional results. So not just ordinary results, but exceptional results. So it's our goal to be the best utility in the country. So you have that drive for results, but the power of it is the power of and doing it in a way that really truly engages the employees so that they can reach their full potential. And if you can really, I guess, click into that, the power of the people, and really tap into intrinsic motivation, the way you do that is through engaging them in a purpose that's bigger than themselves, giving them the autonomy and the ability to master something. Then you get exponential productivity from the workforce. So that's what we're trying to we're trying to build. Now, so let me talk about what I walked into. So what I walked into a number of years ago when I started at PPL is a culture that I would describe as passive defensive, which is very conventional, hierarchical. You got to check before you move forward, and also very conflict avoidant. And in my view, knowing that there was change coming, that is a recipe for disaster, and that we needed to develop another culture that really, no matter what future ends up, we would be adaptable to adjust to that future and excel in that future. So what are some of the components? So obviously adaptability obviously is very important. That's what we're trying to set an environment up for. Curiosity, for me, is something that is not talked about enough. But so I'll give you an example. I knew and we knew that data analytics would be really important. We capture a lot of information about customers, about our own equipment, and we should be able to utilize that to run a better organization. So we went out and hired statisticians, but the problem was the first few that we brought in weren't very curious, so they were basically sitting on their hands waiting to be told what to do, and that we weren't getting any outcomes. So we went out and hired some different people, those that were actually intellectually curious, and those groups are now excelling because they just ask questions. What if we took a look at this? Particularly in data analytics, you'll be surprised about where the correlations lie. So I'll give you a sort of a wild example. We get outages caused by large birds going up on our transmission facilities, and they spread their wings to dry their wings, and then they cause an outage, and unfortunately it's a fatal error on their part. But we said, okay, what can we do to go protect the facilities from this? Because it would be cost prohibitive to go to every structure. So we actually used data analytics and found these weird correlations: proximity to population, proximity to water, proximity to forests, and we identified a small population of structures that we went out and treated, and we've reduced the impact of that on our system. So curiosity is key. Humility, that probably, that may be a weird term for some, but I'm a huge believer that if you have humility in the organization, that you're open to new ideas, you're open to new possibilities, and the opposite is arrogance. For me, arrogance is, arrogant folks don't do well in my organization. So, because for me, it's a sign that it's a learning blocker sign for me, that they believe they know everything and they aren't open to new ideas, new possibilities. They aren't the person you want to bring into a group to talk about how to do things differently. And that gets me to the next one, continuous learning. While that sounds like motherhood and apple pie, is very difficult to instill within an organization, because I think a lot of us have tendencies or perfectionism. And if you have that, it's difficult to say, you know what, things didn't really go well. I'm going to spend a lot of time figuring out why they didn't, learn from them, and then move on. And I'll give you a great example of this. So when I first started at PPL, there was another company that was doing great in customer satisfaction. So I sent 3 folks down to go visit them. They spent about 2 days down there. They came back, and I said, so what did you learn? Oh, we do everything better than they do. And I said, so there wasn't one thing that they did better that you learned? No, we're better at everything. And that's a sign of arrogance. Mm-hmm. We had won quite a bit, number of J.D. Power awards, and so we went down there. 2 minutes, I'm going to really quick. So last year I sent 3 more people down there, different people, came back with pages of stuff. So continuous learning is really important. Innovation, real quick story. You just can't go out and tell people to innovate. I tried that, nothing happened. So I actually brought in an outfit that really has a process, taught us a process, a way to think about things differently, and it's really worked. And one of the other findings is that the innovation teams that we put together, the ones that are most effective are the ones that have more diversity: gender, age, race, where they are in the organization. And then power of and, execute. You need to execute in the here and now and look to the future. So from individual adaptability, I think we've heard a lot about it. Those that aren't adaptable to changing conditions are more at risk in the future. And I think that's a huge concern for me. And, I think about, I have children and, hopefully they'll have children. I'm concerned about their future. I think the folks in the workforce need to be more outward looking, understanding the trends, understanding how that's going to impact their business as well as themselves, and plan accordingly. But basically, from an individual perspective, I'm looking for the same characteristics that I talked about in the organization. I'm looking for folks that are adaptable, curious, have humility, continuous learners. There are folks that just love to learn. Those are the ones that are, I'd say, making the difference more than any other in my organization. They aren't necessarily the smartest, but they're ones out there reading, finding out what's happening in other industries, bringing it back, trying it out is absolutely key. Innovation, and this also goes to skill sets. So those that are able to build on others' ideas and really work with others very well and are able to accelerate ideas, they're very important. And again, those that can deliver results and look for industry and technology trends going forward. So again, the summary is adaptability is very important, not only for the organization, but the people in the organization. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Great job. Our next speaker is Robert Johnson. He's the Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Has held that position since July of 2017, so relatively new there. His prior role was at Becker College in Worcester, and there he really instilled a concept called agile mind. It's been written about. So, the idea of adaptability and weaving that into the foundation from a higher education perspective, of which I'm sure now he's taken it into the Dartmouth environment. So with that, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk about the agile mindset as it relates to the future of work, and particularly with a focus on the academy. A lot of the work that I've done has been in conjunction with a dear friend who's also a futurist, Heather McGowan. So you'll see several of the slides where, well, all of the slides, her name is up there as well, because we have created this work together. So when we think about, what I want to talk about, I want to give you the context of what's driving change. I want to look at the career arc, and then I want to talk about how we need to think differently as it relates to the agile mindset. So what's driving this change? Let's think about context. So if we think about routine capabilities over time, humans have been conditioned to act more like machines, and machines have developed capabilities, to act more like humans. And so we're at this inflection point today. And what's going to happen over the next 20 years is going to continuously result in exponential change. So this inflection window was the opportunity and the challenge for us as we look at the academy. So let's think about this. Life expectancy, going back to 1750 and what has taken place during that time. It took us 100 years to go from the steam engine to the combustion engine, and then another 100 years to have a telephone, and we have plenty of them now, right? But what we also see are the paradigm shifts that took place during those same periods of times. The point being is that we're living longer, and the paradigm shifts are greater. And that presents a huge challenge for us when we think about careers and what needs to take place not only in the academy but in the place of work. So over the past 10 plus years, 1995, I remember being at Oakland University, vice provost, the internet, what's that? 10 years ago, the smartphone is just 10 years old. The iPhone. We've seen a lot of changes just in the last 10 plus years, but going forward over the next 10 plus years, we're even going to see more change. So we need to be cognizant of that and ask ourselves constantly, what does that mean for the world of work? What does that mean for the academy? So let's look at the various industrial revolutions, 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, oops. Went too fast. 3.0 and 4.0. But the talent that was needed and during each of these times is changing. I mean, we went from the basic place of physical labor, the sweat of your brow, going way, way, way back to the 18th century, to now to this period where we have to have uniquely human skills to do work that robots cannot do. So when we look at the talent shifts over this same period of time, we've gone from having to be generalists to specialists to hyper specialists, and now back to neo-generalists. So we are right there between the information age and the augmented era. But our mental models are still trying to move from the industrial to the information age, which creates a challenge. So, point being, rapidly accelerating change, replacement of cognitive labor, and we're in this hyper-connected world that's moving really fast. So let's look at the career arc. Let's talk about the old model of the career arc. You go to school for 20 some odd years, you go get a job, you contribute, you retire, life is good. Your panic zone was primarily in your adult years. Am I going to get that raise? Am I going to get that promotion? And ultimately you wanted to retire. And when we look at that old model in terms of perceived value, you develop that brain the first 20 some odd years, you acquire expertise, you mature, you have judgment, and then there's this high value zone, somewhere between your late 30s and early 50s. Man, so I'm past that. Does that mean I have wisdom now? We'll see. But the point being is that somewhere around 45, the age of 45, you have this high value. But let's look at today's world of work, and let's look at the companies, Apple, Amazon, Google, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Okay, that's the workforce of the new economy. Let's look at what the high value zone looks like for them. Very different. 35 versus 45. So what does that do when we think of perceived value? Skills demand. It has moved back and in a very shorter time frame. Longevity, we're living longer. So, what is the new 40 and what does that really mean in the world of work in terms of our current workforce and those types of companies with these we call digital natives? So we have education panic, we have work change panic, and we have retirement panic. In other words, we're panicked our entire lives, okay? But it's because of this rapidly changing world. So the old paradigm says, you get an education, you go to work, you retire, you live somewhere between 70, 75 years. The rate of change was relatively none. The new emerging reality, change all the time. You work all of your life, adult life. You're learning your entire life. And then you have to remain engaged at the end. Old economy, you learn, you work, you retire. Some change. New economy, you work, you learn, and you recondition yourself. And your lifespan is 90 plus years old with constant change. So, we're living longer, change rates are faster, the younger generation, its skill sets are skewing younger, and learning has a new role. So the agile mindset, let's talk about that. What do you want to be when you grow up? What is your major? So what do you do for work? Well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, if you're in grade school, 65% of those jobs don't exist. So how do you answer that question? 40% of the jobs that currently exist will be automated. What is your major? Well, 27% of the people in the workforce in our generation work within their major that they had in college. What do you do? My kids, 22 and 24, 17 jobs, 5 different industries. 3 of those industries do not even exist. So, we've traditionally dealt with the what, which is the end product. How are we going to build that product, which is a process, and the why. And then we ultimately get to the purpose of the company. Well, if we look at Apple as an example, they look at purpose. In everything we do, we challenge the status quo. We want to think differently. Then they look at a process to do that. Then they create a product, and then ultimately they come up with things like a computer, an iPod, iPad, iPhone, streaming, and what have you. So when we think about this from an educational model, what is our passion for young people? What is their passion? How do we teach them to become productive? Because if they're passionate, then the productivity will naturally come. They will create value from that. And then with those 5 different industries, they will continuously evolve. So when we think about this model, we need to think about the why, the how, and the what. in terms of market realities, because the only constant in all of this is our why. So when we're educating young people, it is about the why. The jobs will change, the markets will change, and the skills and skill sets they will need will change. So in order to wrap this up, the context of the agile mindset. The old economy says you learn, you do, and the goal was to ultimately create a unit of value. That's what we were educated to do. You got to create a unit of value. The new reality says you learn to learn, you learn to do, and guess what? That unit of value is a byproduct. And ultimately, when you learn to learn and you learn to do, you have increased capabilities. And that's going to be a lifelong process. And then the value creation will come out of that as a natural process. So when we think about all of this, we want to start with the why. When we think about the agile mindset, start with purpose and passion and give our young people uniquely human skills that robots can't do. So in a nutshell, the agile mindset within the academy, we want to give our young people knowledge and the power of learning. We want to impart knowledge to them and give them the ability to learn. We want to give them uniquely human skills that robots cannot do. And if they have that, they will be adaptable and they will be able to always create and add value in the marketplace. And I didn't hear a phone go off, so I'm done.
All right, terrific comments and certainly a lot of different perspectives, but they are leading us to a point that we are at a critical inflection. There's no doubt about it. Across the board, we've all said that. So as I think about our various contributions to this topic, Greg, you're in the position of hiring. So you can, you're sorting out who's likely to be adaptable and be able to morph over time. Oh, I'm sorry. So I just to repeat for the benefit, we've talked about the idea that we're at an inflection point, and all of us are kind of contributing to that in various ways, but that is a common understanding. So Greg, from your perspective, since you're hiring, what is it that you're looking for, and how do you sort out who's going to be adaptable? And the reason I'm also asking that is I'm hoping that from the education perspective and the prepare for jobs perspective and what can the academy do, that you can all kind of lend your perspectives into this. But since you're the one that's got your finger on the hire button, let's hear what you're looking for.
Yeah, so actually I think this is key for successful organizations going forward. So what we're looking for is, I'd say, so if I'm hiring engineers, base technical skill. If I'm hiring linemen, it's base physical skill. But in both cases, what I'm looking for are folks that are adaptable, that are continuous learners. I love the agile mindset. That's exactly what we're looking for. And you try to get that through interviews, but that's not quite good enough. So actually what we're doing is we are using a set of tests. So those that we hire, we put them through a set of tests after we hire them. And we're doing a longitudinal study to see if there's any correlation to the results of those tests to how they're actually doing going forward. But we're looking for people that are able to work across functions within a team and, again, build on everybody's success to get a better product than they would have on their own. But it's a huge challenge for us.
So from the education perspective, you end up having to balance how much technical is in the curriculum versus soft skills or strategic skills as it goes. So how do you balance this in order to create somebody that it really has the adaptability characteristic?
So as I think about this, when we're educating young people for jobs that don't exist, utilizing technologies that haven't been created to solve problems we haven't identified, we have to ask ourselves, how do we give them uniquely human skills that robots can't do? And as we think about the agile mindset, some of those skills are things like empathy, the hallmark of innovation and creativity. And at my last place at Becker, when I went to the faculty and said, we're going to teach empathy, they said, how do you do that? I said, let's go over and talk to our nursing department. Okay, it can be taught. We need to teach them things like social and emotional intelligence, how to work collaboratively on teams to solve problems. Divergent thinking, how do you take the Legos and throw them across the table and create something out of nothing? An entrepreneurial outlook, which is not about becoming an entrepreneur, but it's about teaching them how to add value. So when we think about the agile mindset, for example, it is about learning, knowledge and the power of learning with 4 uniquely human skills to be in this place of value creation, but they have to be steeped in something. And I liken it to, we have to give all of our kids this idea and this foundation of an app versus an operating system. Okay, all of us, I'd venture to say probably all of us were basically educated as apps. Okay, very specific, it's going to work. But what we need to do is educate our young people as on an operating system, so when I upgrade my phone, no matter what the application is, it will work. So we have to teach them to learn how to learn. And do we need majors? I don't know. I'm debating that with myself. I haven't taken it to the faculty yet. I may be entrepreneurial, but I'm not that creative. Just
So I'd like to pile on there. For some years, I've been preaching a different model, a different education model, a T-shaped model versus an I-shaped model. Unfortunately, we are all victims of the I-shaped world. I'm kind of saying what you're saying, using a different set of words. And I have this thesis that says, if we could lighten it up, by the way, there may be ABET certified people here. I'm not a big fan of structure in an environment that doesn't know what the hell structure is, because the boundaries keep changing all the time. So we're kind of fooling ourselves to thinking we're doing a wonderful job of educating people, because I'm not just an electrical engineer, I'm a circuit designing electrical engineer, I'm a memory circuit designing electrical. By the time you get to the bottom, there's like 2 things you can do. I mean, that's your bona fide. That's right. And that's the way we get you a PhD as well. You even become more specific in order to get there. Yet we keep hearing, what the hell? I mean, it's going all over the place. So how do we know that you can do that? So you have to kind of push this T-shaped model very hard. I think the higher education system gets this for the most part. I think there's some signs that people want to go this way. But then we have to cascade that model down. We have to get into, K through 12. We have to, because as I said before, half the people aren't going to go to an institution of higher education. Or maybe your goal is to make them all go there. I doubt that's a good strategy, by the way, is what my sense is, but I have no data for that. But that doesn't stop me from speaking. It may stop you from speaking. So I think maybe it's problem-based learning. I'm a big fan of problem-based learning. That seems to have a different sense to it, where you're teaching people all the skills that you're looking for, by the way, Greg. You're teaching them how to collaborate. You're teaching them how to come together at all ages, to solve a common set of problems. So if we don't take it on from a perspective of we're going to change the education system in order to get the skills that we want, then I think we're back to what my father said. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So you're screwed.
So one thing that I want to jump on, because I think Robert and Nick's comments are very apt here, is it is good for us to focus on the educational system, because that's where a lot of this is going to come from, but it's not just about the educational system. I think that one underpinning here is, and this doesn't just have to do with technological change, but just with changes in the structure of our economy, is that a lot of people, particularly those that we're saying are going to have to be more adaptable, are also simultaneously less economically secure. And I think we can, I think this is obviously in some respects a political lightning rod, so I won't dive too much into it, but I do think you need to make sure that people have some sort of economic safety net, whatever it looks like in this kind of situation, so that you feel like you can actually take the chance to adapt and to learn potentially new skills to complement your existing one. If you're in a situation where people are constantly potentially risking their economic livelihood by doing this, then whatever we do with the educational system will be be blunted and might not be as effective as it would be otherwise.
And I'd like to follow up on that. If we look at this, we tend to look at workforce and skills, and we lump everybody into the same pot. And I think we have to deconstruct it. We have to look at the K through 12, what's happening there. We have to look at us, people who are educated like us. One of the biggest challenges, I think, within organizations and culture is not the younger people, it's those of us who were educated in a very different way, changing our mindsets. But then there is this middle section of individuals. I grew up in Detroit, people who are 40-something, 50-something, and all of a sudden, their father, their grandfather, they had a couple making $200,000 with overtime, and it's gone. Okay? What skills development means for them is going to be very different than the kids I'm educating, and it's going to be very different than what we're doing in the K through 12. And I think it's important for us to make that distinction and understand that continuum.
So we owe these people, in my mind, not to preach, but we owe these people an opportunity, which is what you're hinting at, to reschool themselves, to retool themselves, to reskill themselves. Industry has an obligation. They've been walking away from that for the most part. They just simply lay people off, wish you well, and then away you go. And clearly government. Government has a responsibility here. One of the things we included in Making Value for America was this idea around the equivalent of the GI Bill for displaced workers. At some point in time, either we owe these people a chance to reskill and retool themselves, or we're going to pay for them a different way. So you're either going to pay me now or you're going to pay me later. And we don't want to seem to jump on the table and start to say, let's deal with this issue. But this is the issue that I promise you will sink us if we're not careful.
It's a different social contract.
All right, great discussion and food for the rest of the day, I'm sure. You know, another topic I think that is evolving is a lot of this adaptability involves multidisciplinary skill sets. And a comment last night was made, you know, kids are adaptable and curious, and there's that spirit, but somehow throughout the structures of organizations and education, we kind of create silos.
We beat it out of them, by the way.
We beat it out of them. So, you know, my question now is turning more to the facet of how do we get the old guard that's beating it out of them, quote unquote, out of the way so that we can continue to foster and evolve this adaptability piece. And, you know, Greg, from your perspective, we know the organizational structures of big organizations are quite siloed in nature. So I'm particularly interested in what you think, you know, for you to lead us off in this discussion.
Yeah, well, so it is a lot of hard work, and it's culturally based. So if you have folks that have been within an organization for 30 years and you've been following the unwritten rule book for 30 years, you've been trained not to be creative, not to work across functional silos. So that's when I said, hey, we wanted to do innovation, and I said, go innovate, and nothing happened. That's why. So we basically have had to train our organization about how to innovate and really put them through a process. And what's starting to happen now is that the folks that have gone through, I'd say probably 3/4 of the organization have gone through at least one innovation session. They're coming out excited. And so it's starting to build on itself. And so they're getting success. They're seeing that they're adding value, and they're doing it on their own. But I really think it's a mindset change. You talked about mindset. It's really moving from a sort of a fixed to a growth mindset, given the opportunity, the environment. And then once people get success, you can't take it away from them. It'll build on itself.
Do you see that with the people who work on the line as
Yeah.
well?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's not just the highly educated people in your organization?
That's where they're most excited, because for years no one asked them anything. And I'm going out there and saying, hey, listen, we're going to involve you more in the work. You guys can figure out how best to get the work done, and they are charged up. Now when I go out to a job site, I can't tell, talking to the crew, who's management and who's bargaining unit, because they're given the opportunity. Yeah.
it goes back to this thing of what is your why versus what we want to produce. And it's cultural. It is culturally based. And I think the more that we can help people to discover their passion, and when we talk about organizational change in order to help this evolution, it starts with the data. And what I have found at my previous place and working with Heather and a few other organizations, when you put some of the kind of data I put in front of you, in front of people who are of our generation, it's like, so what are we going to do about this now? And once they understand that why, there's a compelling reason that we have to change, because if we don't, we become extinct. The organization doesn't thrive. It creates a very, very different dynamic, and it unleashes them. Yeah.
So I see a lot of encouraging things going on the outside of the system to kind of get to that infrastructure that's been blocking that you're talking about. I mean, in some cases, I see Drew here from Boy Scouts of America. They're not only the Boy Scouts of America, apparently they're going to be the Girl Scouts of America too, as they're allowing girls to join the boys. But more importantly, they're actually building a different mindset. They're building a more elastic mindset in the youth of America. There is, believe it or not, they have STEM programs now. So it's no longer just badging for the sake of badging. It's accomplishment and achievement. What problems did you solve? Why did you solve those problems? It's a little bit like what you're talking about. That kind of gives me hope, to be honest with you. When those types of things, those types of enterprises, typically run, by people like me who kind of grew up in a different world, in a different space, start to say, you know what, these skills are all wrong too. And unless we're going to start to change them now, we're not going to make any progress, going forward. So there is some evidence that says we're on the right path. To kind of remind you of what Franz said last night, time is not your friend. Time is our enemy. There just isn't enough of it, and we're not going to get any more of it back.
Nick, as I look through these cards, there's two things that kind of resonate. One is the idea of speed and time and how to get this done. I think the audience is, coming through loud and clear on we got to move. So to the extent that any of you have ideas on how to expedite your respective piece of it, I think that would be helpful. Another piece is the data. And so as we look at LinkedIn, what is it that you can share incrementally from your previous comments that point to, what works, what doesn't, where are the trends, what can you see that we can't in order to facilitate adaptability to hit the mark? Guy, can you add to that?
Sure. So that's a great question. I think that this is a question we're in the progress of answering. And so what I discussed earlier is not, I don't consider it the final word. I think that one thing we're going to discover is that the line between durable and non-durable, or adaptable and non-adaptable human capital is a spectrum. And, we can think of extremes with certain kinds of human skills that, as long as humans are involved in the workforce, are always going to be needed, and might even become potentially more important, which is what some of my fellow panelists, Robert, Nick, Greg, have discussed. And then, you're simultaneously going to see some skills that go out of fashion. I think that one slide I didn't show here is very Silicon Valley centric. So I apologize. I guess I'm glad I didn't show it, but I am going to describe it to you, and please forgive me. Forgive the economists, forgive the Silicon Valley folks. Was a chart that just looked at people that had Twitter-related skills. And it looks, Twitter's a wonderful social network that I use myself, particularly as a news source. So that tells you how different generations use news sources. But demand for those skills has fallen substantially in job openings, which just reflects the fact that the highest premium skills in marketing or engineering for social networks have shifted to other social networks. Maybe now it's Snapchat or something that I don't actually know about, because at this point I guess I'm entering the enlightenment zone in Robert chart or whatever it is. Unfortunately, I'm substantially older than the median LinkedIn employee. But the reason I say that is, you've seen this specific skill crash, but it's not obvious to me that the people that have these skills are experiencing that kind of economic decline. Maybe they have pivoted. to pick one that actually has nothing to do with Silicon Valley, a few years ago, I don't know who here is from the fossil fuel rich areas of Texas or North Dakota or Pennsylvania or Ohio. There's big oil and gas boom in a lot of these places. The oil price crashed. And what's interesting is that some places you can certainly economically experience recession. A lot of people probably left North Dakota. I suspect a lot of those people pivoted into residential construction. So that's a place where there's middle skill, maybe in some cases even, what we would say low skill workers, if you can excuse the connotations behind that. But people of varying human capital compositions, and they did manage to move. I think that one of the things that happened was we had a growing economy, so people could switch instead of a national recession. Skill sets crashing or human capital, it's when you have sets of human capital that potentially can be used in multiple places, people do change. And so I guess I would say that this is a case where something existed, which was residential construction, which could absorb a lot of the people that were previously involved in the fossil fuel extraction industry. You need geographic mobility, you need economic security, but I think that just because some small chunk of your human capital suddenly drops in value doesn't mean that your human capital in its entirety is worthless. And I think that sort of illustrates, if anything, that just because a skill loses value doesn't mean, for the individual, that as long as they can find something else that uses most of their existing human capital, they'll do okay. So
the thing that I'd like to tag on here is we do a terrible job as a country helping people understand what you just said. We make it very complicated, and it's even more complicated for mid-skilled people. We don't know how many plumbers we need or electricians we need or why we should all chase shale gas or why we should do any of these that work on lines. How many line people do you really need? We don't help people think about this. There's no context for it. We're not a directed economy. We have no industrial policy. And yet we're competing globally with countries that have all of those things and more. They want to orchestrate everything, and we need to also be more honest in an environment where we're asking people to be more flexible, where we're asking people to be more innovative. We have to be simply more candid and say, you know what? We either don't know or we don't need a lot of those. So you can be one of those, but there's only 4 of them required, and you better be damn good at it, because the other 40,000 of you aren't going to get a job. We don't do that. Nobody wants to be tough. Higher education doesn't want to be tough. What the hell course did you want to take? Of course, you got $50,000. Give me your money, and we'll graduate you. I don't mean to indict you all, so please, I don't know poison pen letters. And don't you see this? We owe people some of this, don't you think? I mean, industry owes it, higher education owes it, the country owes it.
I wholeheartedly agree, and we have to think about how do we become disruptive in higher education, within industry, when it comes to moving away from skill set to mindset. How do we explain, to friends I grew up with in Detroit who went straight into the factory, who are 50-something now, what happened to them? We have to have the courage to say, you know what, those coal jobs are not going to come back. And it's not because they were exported, it's not because of immigrants, it's because the world has changed. But then we have to go a step further and say, but this is what we're going to do about it. And this is how we have to come together as a nation to address this issue. We go to maybe points 1 or 2, and we just stop there and we blame everybody. But we have to come up with what are the solutions as a logical next step, because I really do believe that same middle worker, if he or she had the data and they understood it, and we suggested, here are the 3 things we need to do, the country would come together and we would figure it out. And I don't know that there's an absolute answer, but we would figure it out.
Excellent dialogue. In this idea that we're working with a limited amount of time, there's multiple prongs. And obviously the education is one, but that takes a long time to instill. grade school, high school, college. There's a long, long pipeline that goes with that in terms of time. And it's important. But, what else can we be doing with those that are in position, for those that are over, 50 and kind of looking at that tail end as you presented earlier? Is there something that collectively we can work with that group in order to prime the pump?
Yes, I call them the perennials, by the way, not the millennials, but the perennials. I am one. I wasn't even on your chart, by the way. I'm 72, so I'm kind of off your chart. I think this is a bigger problem than most people even think about. I mean, we all understand what's happening. We all understand we're living longer. But the fact of the matter is not that we're living longer. We all want to do something, So to your point, is that the workforce that you enlist to go back and help the workforce that missed? I mean, they're pretty smart people. They're pretty accomplished people. For the most part, these are the people that have the wisdom, that have the collective knowledge, that have been successful. Is there some way to get them to kind of go back and say, well, you're going to help us work through this Detroit situation, or you're going to help us work through what's going on in Montana or South Dakota or Pennsylvania. You're going to help us do this. Maybe you enlist them as volunteers. Who says everybody's got to get paid anyway? You're already getting paid. So this sense of, I'm going to reach out to your point, Robert, maybe there is a sense of patriotism where we re-enlist, this aged wisdom to kind of go back and do something. I'm just throwing that out there. That's just a stupid idea. So throw it away if you don't like it.
I think that has to be part of the equation. On one side, I think on the other side of the equation, there also has to be a practicality with it, and that is, I'm 55 years old. I used to make $100,000 a year, and now I'm lucky if I can get a job in Walmart. Okay, and I have a family to take care of. So we have to find that balance of, what is that new reality, and there are jobs in places, so coal miners, if they were willing to move out of the hills of West Virginia, there are parts of the country they could go and get a job. So I think part of this is moving away, not just moving away from skill set to mindset, but helping people to understand that there is a new reality. I don't know how you do that, but I think there's a social, this notion of social mobility. And I'll give this example, and I'll shut up. When my wife and I moved from Ohio to Massachusetts, it was in 2010. Of course, the housing market had crashed. We ended up, I was fortunate, I was blessed, we were living in the president's home. We sold our house in 2012. And, it was no problem. But when I went to closing, I went there with $95,000 where I had to write a check. I was able to do that. But that person, that middle worker, their job's out there, they just can't do that. Okay, so there's a reality to this that we have to address as well. So we can't, so we have to find that balance in terms of how we figure out how to address this issue. And I wish I knew the answer.
Yeah, I just want to talk about it from the context of within a company. So the way we've approached it is to be very transparent about what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the company, and what the challenges are. And then, right, the why, exactly. And then also provide opportunity for folks to prepare themselves to be successful in that new future. And we're 100% helping them get there. I do want to say that there is a fraction that is not interested. That's right. and we're also very clear about where that path leads to. Right. But I think it's all about conveying a sense what the future looks like, the role they can play in the future, and what needs to change.
So that transparency is terribly important. I compliment you for doing that. Robert, to your point, not everybody has to move to get a new job. If you really look at what technology is doing, it's gutting certain industries. The bottom of the service sector is being gutted by online organizations that do similar work and don't even exist as organizations. There's a movie company called Tongo that doesn't exist. It produces video. It produces movies. There is no theater. You know, it's all done online. So this idea that you have to move may be a passé idea as well. But to your point, we got to take that Detroit displaced worker and we've got to give that person those skills and make them aware of these opportunities and the possibilities that they can participate.
And I think we have to, it comes back to this why question. So that man or woman who is in Detroit, we have to help them understand why they need to change. And you know what? You might be able to do work and not leave the city of Detroit, and you're working for a company in Iowa or California or Europe, for that matter, or China or wherever. But unless we help them to understand that why, like what you're doing within your company, saying, hey, here are the realities of our marketplace. And, you know, the data is the data. People get on board. It's like, wow, okay, well, let's figure it out. And I think that's part of the challenge. But nobody has the courage and the fortitude to say to that blue collar worker, it's gone. It's gone. It's done. And there's a new reality.
So
Data being the data.
I was gonna jump in. So because I think this is actually really interesting. I'm gonna take a slightly different view, which is I don't think we shouldn't sell the geographic mobility opportunity short. I think that since I was going to joke since Attila of the Hun rolled into Europe, for a long time people have been moving from place to place for economic opportunity. Since before Attila. And I think if you look at this country's history, that's actually probably one of the most repeatedly in the 18th century, the 19th century, and the 20th century, people have moved. And what is one of the things that is most characteristic of that? It's ability to do so relatively affordably. And that is disappearing, particularly in a lot of the areas of the country that were essentially the most economic opportunities being created. And I think that we can talk about the educational system, we can talk about the safety net. I think that you know, something Robert brought up almost, I wouldn't say as an afterthought, but it's almost prosaic, and I feel silly saying it, but not being able to afford housing in a place that has a lot of jobs is having a pretty big, is disrupting adaptability in a pretty big way, because there's certain places you can't move. And it's also, if you think about money being left on the table, the fact that you might not be able to go to, whether it's, I mean, we can think about it, even places that didn't used to be very affordable in the past are no longer affordable. That's actually keeping people in relatively lower value economic paths, because they can't go, they might have to go to some place that's lower value just because, for their careers, just because that's the only place where they can afford to live. So let's not, while I agree that there may be ways to get around that through restructuring the economy, you still need to keep that geographic mobility piece on the table, and that means somehow figuring out an affordable housing solution in this country.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question on leadership, and then after we go through that, I'll ask for questions from the floor. So the leadership question, we talked about courage. And we talked about multidisciplinary and kind of painting the vision. But my question really is, what's the difference of a leader of, you know, up until now that's perhaps been more successful in a command and control environment to the characteristics of a leader in an adaptable world? And I ask that within the context that it seems that creativity and collaboration and innovation and working together has to be characteristics that bubble up a leader going forward. And perhaps it's painting that vision more than telling. But I'd like you to either say yes or no and add to that, and also, you know, present examples if you could, because in terms of the leadership role in this transformation would be helpful.
Well, let's start with the business leader.
Yeah. So Greg.
All right. So obviously, I believe leadership is key, because really, when you take a look at culture, which I said was the most important thing, leaders drive culture. So I talk about an unwritten rule book. Basically, the employees are looking at what the leader's talking about, who they hire, who they fire, what's important to them. Right. That basically sets the culture. So it's very important. And I'll give you an example of the culture. So when I first started at the company, I believe I probably knew of every improvement initiative going on in the company, which is really sad. And now I have, no idea, and it's great. I walk up to people, talk to them in the hallway. They're talking about what's going on and what they're working on. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's fantastic."
Wish I knew about it.
Well, no, I'm actually okay, because they understand what the vision, what the goals of the organization are, and they're taking initiative upon themselves to figure out better ways of moving forward. So that's, for me, it's great. It really starts with leadership, and it needs to be driven throughout the organization. The other challenge is you can have sort of barriers, that it works a couple of levels and then it stops.
Right.
That takes a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, you got to get rid of the middle. Right? It's always the middle. It's always been the middle. It remains the problem. I'll just go the opposite way. When I was at IBM, I was responsible for a couple 100,000 technical people. So they all, whether they really did or not, didn't matter. They seemed to think they worked for me. And that's actually the better kind of a job to have, when they all think they work for you. Leadership. It simply always was about be honest, be truthful. They all know the truth anyway. And by the way, this is kind of like a growing attribute with the millennials. They really want to know the truth. They're going to find the truth one way or the other. So be honest and be hopeful. They do not need you to depress them. They're already depressed. They have a tough job. They're working nonstop, 24/7. So you've got to be hopeful. You've got to point to a future that's better and how we're going to get there. They'll follow you. So if you just had two things to do as a leader, to be honest and to be hopeful, and it sounds like, Greg, that's exactly who you are and why you've had so much success, at your company. I think you're well on your way, especially in this environment. I mean, this grows. This doesn't diminish when you think about what really matters to millennials and what they think the Truth Index is all about. This is what they want. They want to work in an environment, in a culture that supports this honesty and this hopefulness.
I agree with all of that. The only other thing I would add is also, as part of the transparency, the honesty, the culture, is providing room to give people the opportunity to fail.
Yep.
Okay, because if they think they're going to be chastised every time they fail, they're not going to try anything new. And if they don't try anything new, you're not going to get anything different. Now, I mean, there's failing and then there's failing, okay? But the point is, and one of my bosses told me some 25 years ago, she looked me dead in the eye and she said, "Look, whatever you do, don't be afraid to fail," And I think that's one of the keys to leadership and creating an environment where there's a tolerance level for that to happen.
So to your point, Robert, and I know you understand this, from an academic perspective, but from an industrial perspective, technical people are always failing. They all can't succeed at the same time. So the culture I tried to build was a forthright. Tell me the truth because I'm going to find it out anyway. You're behind schedule. It doesn't work. We need a new plan. Just tell me the truth. Be forthright. I will be forthcoming. So I won't yell at you. I won't. Now, if you do this on a regular basis, that's a different story. We may fire you. But, trying to manage the true big problems at a higher level in an organization as large as IBM turned out to be a very good idea, as opposed to letting them try to, accuse each other of who derailed this project and whose module didn't show up at the right time and whose fault was it, hardware, software, or services, or, well, the client didn't know what the hell they wanted, so let's blame them. So all of those things, kind of go into this cultural mix, but it gets back to truth. It gets back to be forthright, I will be forthcoming. Does that make sense to you?
Thanks for your comments and thoughts there. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
So, you scouting.
Yeah, please go up and use the mic, or there we go.
Okay, got it. Drew, thank you. Drew Glassford, Director of Strategic Initiatives with Boy Scouts National Foundation. Great to be here. One of our key STEM partners is Tata Consultancy Services, right? So they've invested pretty heavily in computer science, computational sciences. You know, they recognize the value of that. They've really provided some insight into their skills initiative in India. And I know we talked about China, we touched on India a little bit yesterday, but when you look at the focus in India between government and industry, the recognition of the issue and the development of the issue that's occurred there, it's pretty remarkable on the partnerships that have occurred and the results that have occurred there in skills development. What are the influences? I mean, I think of arrogance and I think of, I guess, distractions that we have from that issue, Nick. I think you really, nailed that on the need for focus on like a WPA type of focus on this, that this is a real issue. What are the barriers to that you think we have, and how can we influence that? What's the best way we can influence that policy change or policy focus and emulate something that India's been able to do pretty successfully?
Do you want?
So let me jump in here with two things. And again, this is the economist perspective. So India is a wonderful place. I think it has tremendous potential. The one thing to just keep in mind as a preface is that chunk of the Indian economy that is functionally competing with the U.S. workforce is tiny. I mean, it's going to grow over time. It's grown a lot. But I would not be too hard on ourselves, given that I think, for example, in India, one of the biggest challenges is not training people to be Java developers. It's to figure out how to turn a lot of people in an informal, either retail economy that's very unproductive or agriculture, and find ways for them to upskill themselves. And so these challenges exist in many forms in lots of places in the world. What I would say, if you were thinking about how to structure it, from my perspective, I think you have, because of the way this country is structured, which is wonderful, it's a very, we have a government that lets, it shifts from political administration to administration, but things are very decentralized. They're decided at a local level, they're decided by private sector and government sector actors. The one challenge is a lot of these actors have incentives that are guiding them sometimes in the wrong direction. So, for example, in terms of if you're an employer and you're thinking of training your workers, your incentive is actually going to be to teach them to be as specialized as possible, to have skills that are only useful in your own organization, not to teach them adaptable skills that potentially allow them to jump ship and make more money elsewhere. From the employee's perspective, your incentive is to learn things that are going to give you money right away, not necessarily to learn certain kinds of more broader skills that do provide more insurance in the long run, but potentially give up some income in the short run. So you need to find some sort of way to blunt these incentives and develop, the kind of adaptability and durability that we want. If you don't, then you're going to end up with a lot of the same problems we're having, which is an increasingly specialized workforce and employers that don't provide the training that workers are going to need in the long run.
So we almost agree with each other, which is scary, given where I come from and where he comes from. I think the answer is at the local level. I think we beat our heads against the wall here in Washington. We've done as much as we can. I think we need to find states that really do care about this and try to make a difference. We had New York State spoke very boldly at the Making Value for America. They've done an incredible job of bringing jobs to New York State. They put a lot of money behind it. And you're right, Guy. Maybe they didn't totally build the most adaptable workforce. Maybe it was the selfish workforce. It was around high-tech semiconductor, tooling, processing, and then a stream of businesses that kind of flowed with it. But I think, maybe Texas, wants to do something. I don't know. But I think we're always better served if we can look as local as we can. We'll move faster there. And then we can get some footholds, on these topics. And then maybe because we're getting footholds, everybody else will start to take notice of that. And by the way, that's why institutions of higher education are important. You're dominant, in certain, geographic areas. They do care about what you have to say. So the more that you use, your clout locally, probably the better served we're going to be. I have a whole different theory about India, and it's too involved, so I'll tell you about it.
Yes, my question's Dr. Johnson. as a higher education entity that's looking at capital dollars for infrastructure, what would you say to me or the others in the room that's interested about how do we make sure that the buildings we build are going to be adaptable and resilient for our future when we don't know what that future is going to be?
Well, that's a loaded question. So I'll tell you what we're doing at UMass Dartmouth. We have about 9,000 students. We have an infrastructure that can hold about 10,000 students. And 10 years from now, we'll have an enrollment, I'm predicting somewhere between 20 and 25,000 students. But it's going to be click and mortar. It's going to be click and mortar. So we will reach our capacity at that 10 or 11,000 in terms of the physical campus. But under the notion of lifelong learning, learning to learn, we have 50,000 alumni. So as he is employing UMass Dartmouth alums, okay, and the skill set needs to be retooled, they'll be able to go out online and do it. Scott Tingle, who will be going to the International Space Station in December, one of our alums, 5 years from now, he's going to need something else. So we need. I don't think of our business as brick and mortar anymore. It's click and mortar. And the click and mortar is about the students who we're educating, who are coming out of school, and it's about the individuals who have the mindset to be lifelong learners and need to retool themselves. And if there's something, for example, in his company that he sees 5 years from now of a set of skills that he wants his employees to have, I'll partner with him to build that program. May it be virtual, online, a hybrid where we come to his company and teach the classes at lunchtime, or some combination thereof. And I think where we go wrong as higher education leaders is we want to build that next building to grow our enrollments and to build that next building to grow more enrollments. That's not the future. So your classrooms need to be flex space. Anything you do, you have to ask yourself, what are the 5 other things might we be able to use this for? How do we utilize this space for maker space? Faculty offices shouldn't be faculty offices. In many of the corporate sectors, you have this open space. Well, why don't we have, the business and biology and engineering and faculty all in this room with no walls? And if we need a one-on-one meeting, we have some side rooms where we can go, but it causes us to cross-pollinate. Now, the biggest problem, of course, in the academy as it relates to the agile mindset is not the students. It's us. because when I went to Morehouse, steeped in the liberal arts, I was taught how to think critically and how to solve problems. But I was not intentionally taught when I was thinking critically and how to solve problems to seek out ways to add and create new value. And, so we have people who are educating a generation of young people who were taught one way, in an I, okay? And we have a generation that's coming up and saying, you're still writing on the chalkboard, and I already got that figured out. I don't need to know the quadratic equation. I need to know how to use it, but I don't need to have it memorized. But yet you have somebody standing up there saying, okay, I'm going to test you on how to on the quadratic equation. I want you to be able to write it down. Really? So I think higher education is going to be disrupted. And my job and my notion is I want to disrupt. So I want to put other people out of business. I'm just saying.
By the way, on that topic, we have somebody from Steelcase here who's interested in that whole building flexibility.
Yeah, they got to learn how to evolve that a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
One last question. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. David Sarnoff, Board of Education in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Nick, I certainly agree it's a local level problem, and I think the commissioners of education from all 50 states should participate in this. And for anybody who wants to partner with the school district, we're happy to be a laboratory. But to Dr. Johnson's point, I got to tell you, between the presentation last night and yours about speed and panic, and I mean, my heart rate started to elevate. And dealing with school children, too, who face these pressures from parents and assessments, there's a real human toll here. And there's a lot of students, suicide rates are up, self-harming, opioid addiction. And to what extent should the human toll of all this stress of speed and movement and change and not being able to process from a human interaction level, should we be including in this conversation?
So one of the things that I think Nick brought up, we're not being honest. Yes. The reason it feels so overwhelming is because we're not telling people the truth. We're not being honest. Because, like you said, the point of me making that presentation in the way that I did, I was hoping that heart rates would go up. I didn't want anybody to go into cardiac arrest. But, we need to be shocked we need to present people with the data. When in the history of this country, when we really understood the real deal and what the real problem is, without blaming others, did we not come together and figure it out? So the parents are suffering, that's translating to the kids, okay? But at some point, we got to say, stop. Let's deal with the real issues. And that's more of a social commentary, more so than a policy one. But if we don't do that, I mean, the kids that I'm educating right now, they watch their parents go through the Great Recession. One day, life was really, really good. And then the next day, I mean, at one point, 40% of all households were underwater. That was, and these kids saw their parents go through a transformation. And we're not dealing with that. We're acting like, oh, well, the stock market's at 23,000, all is good. Yeah, right.
I can't think of a better note to land this panel on and say, working together, we can figure it out. We can figure it out. That's our objective here today. I think this panel did a great job presenting why adaptability matters. Please give them a round of applause.